18 seconds. From the moment the driver's trained eye detected the anomaly on the road ahead to the moment his foot stomped the accelerator to the floor, a total of 18 seconds elapsed. In that brief window of time, a decision was made that would defy standard operating procedure, contradict years of institutional training, and directly determine the survival of a three-man crew and the security of $5 million in negotiable bearer bonds. It was a decision that would pit a 7-ton armored truck against a meticulously planned ambush executed by a cartel kill squad. Today, we will not sensationalize the violence of this event. We will dissect it. We will analyze the confluence of technology, procedure, and human psychology that occurred on that isolated stretch of highway at 6:47 in the morning. In this business, we have a saying: the vehicle is your weapon, your shield, and your coffin. For the crew of this cash-in-transit unit, their vehicle was about to become all three. This is the story of how one man's refusal to die in a box turned that box into a battering ram. The operation was what the industry refers to as a sweep run. It was a routine end-of-quarter consolidation of financial instruments from several regional banking institutions, destined for a central clearinghouse in a major metropolitan area. These runs are the lifeblood of a certain stratum of the financial world, but they are also its most glaring vulnerability. Their routes, while varied on a day-to-day basis, are ultimately constrained by infrastructure. Their schedules, while flexible by the hour, are predictable by the week and month. Over time, patterns emerge, and patterns create opportunities for those who study them with hostile intent. The target was not cash, which is heavy, bulky, and traceable. It was bearer bonds, the last vestige of anonymous, paper-based wealth, representing maximum value for minimum weight and volume. $5 million contained within a single hardened briefcase. The vehicle itself was a testament to the modern art of defensive engineering, a product from a specialized security vehicle company known for its robust, if uninspired, designs. It was based on a heavy-duty commercial truck chassis, up-armored to a certified B6 level. This designation means it was designed to withstand impacts from high-powered rifle ammunition, specifically 7.62 by 51mm rounds, the standard for many military battle rifles. The passenger cabin and cargo hold were a contiguous armored monocoque, a steel shell designed to protect its occupants. The glass was not glass at all, but a multi-layered composite of polycarbonate and leaded acrylic, nearly 2 inches thick. It could stop multiple rifle rounds in a tight grouping, though it would star and craze, progressively obscuring vision. The tires were military-grade run flats, capable of sustaining multiple punctures and continuing for at least 30 miles at reduced speed. The vehicle weighed approximately 14,000 pounds, and its diesel engine was tuned for torque, not speed. It was, in essence, a mobile vault, but every piece of armor has a weakness. A B6-rated vehicle is not a main battle tank. It is proof against penetration, but not against the secondary effects of kinetic energy transfer. A high-velocity round impacting the steel plate, even if it does not perforate, can cause the interior surface of the armor to flake off in a shower of tiny, red-hot metal fragments. This phenomenon, known as spalling, can be as lethal as the bullet itself, creating a shotgun-like blast inside a sealed compartment. Furthermore, while the body was hardened, its systems were not. A well-aimed burst could shred coolant lines, sever electrical conduits, or disable the engine control unit. The armor bought time. It did not guarantee victory. It was a shield, but a finite one. The crew consisted of 3 men, each with a specific function dictated by corporate security protocols. In the rear cargo bay, a single guard was responsible for the asset itself. His role was passive defense. He was to remain in his compartment, armed, and await resolution. In the front passenger seat sat the communications and navigation officer, a junior man on the team. His job was to manage the encrypted radio, monitor GPS, and call for support in the event of an incident. And then there was the driver. He was the senior member of the crew, a veteran of over 20 years in the private security sector, with a background in dignitary protection in high-threat environments overseas. He was not just a driver. He was the vehicle commander. His experience was not forged in the predictable world of domestic logistics, but in the asymmetrical chaos of foreign conflict zones. This distinction would prove to be the single most important variable in the equation. The final piece of the pre-incident context is the most critical and the most common point of failure in any security operation. It was not a mechanical flaw or a procedural oversight. It was a systemic intelligence failure. Subsequent investigation revealed that details of the sweep run schedule had been compromised weeks in advance. A low-level administrative employee at one of the participating financial institutions had been cultivated as an asset by a major trafficking organization looking to diversify its revenue streams. For a sum amounting to less than 1% of the value of the cargo, this insider provided the key that unlocked the entire operation for the enemy: the when. The attackers already knew the what and the where. With the final piece of intelligence, they could begin to plan the how. The adversaries in this engagement were not common criminals. The tactical signature of the attack bore none of the hallmarks of a low-level smash and grab. There was no chaotic spray of gunfire, no disorganized rush. The planning was meticulous, the execution clinical. The personnel were believed to be former special operations soldiers from a South American nation, now operating as high-end contractors for the cartel. These were men who understood fields of fire, interlocking sectors of engagement, and the precise application of violence to achieve a specific psychological effect. They were professionals. Their choice of ambush location was a textbook example of tactical geography. They selected a 2-lane stretch of highway approximately 30 miles outside the city limits. The road here cut through a shallow depression with gently sloping wooded terrain on both sides. This created a natural channel, limiting the target's potential for off-road escape. Crucially, this section of road was a cellular dead zone, a fact confirmed by the attackers' pre-operational surveillance. This would degrade the crew's ability to call for immediate backup. The ambush site, or kill zone, was positioned just after a long, sweeping right-hand curve. This ensured the target vehicle would be traveling at a reduced speed, and the driver would have a limited reaction time once the obstruction came into view. The attackers had calculated the average response time for the nearest law enforcement patrol to be a minimum of 12 minutes. They planned for an operation lasting no more than 5. The ambush plan, what we call the ambush box, was designed around a simple, effective principle: force the target to a complete stop within a pre-selected fatal zone. The box had 4 elements. The first was the block, a stolen sedan parked sideways across both lanes, simulating a traffic accident. This was the lure. The second and third elements were the flank security, 2 fire teams of 2 men each, concealed in the woods on either side of the road, approximately 40 yards from the intended stopping point. They were armed with military-style automatic rifles chambered in 5.56mm. Their job was to initiate the attack and suppress the target. The final element was the rear guard, a single vehicle with 2 more operators, which would move in behind the armoured truck once it had stopped, sealing the box and preventing any retreat. The entire plan was predicated on a single, critical, and ultimately flawed assumption. The attackers assumed that the driver of the armoured vehicle would behave in a predictable, compliant manner. They assumed he would follow his training. Standard operating procedure for an unexpected, non-hostile appearing roadblock is clear. Stop at a safe distance, assess the situation and radio for instructions or support. Do not approach. Do not engage. The attackers had planned for this. They had planned for a static target. Their intellectual arrogance, their belief in the predictability of their opponent's doctrine, was their fatal flaw. They had failed to account for the one variable that can unravel even the most perfect plan: the unconventional will of a single, determined man. At 6:47 and 3 seconds in the morning, the armoured truck rounded the final portion of the curve. The sun was still low, casting long shadows across the asphalt. Visibility was excellent. The driver, with his 2 decades of experience, was not merely driving, he was scanning. His eyes moved in a constant, practiced rhythm. Road, mirrors, instruments, verges. It was a subconscious process, a state of relaxed vigilance that is the hallmark of the security professional. His gaze registered the sedan blocking the road ahead, approximately 100 yards distant. This was the first step in the cognitive process known as the OODA loop: observe. The initial observation triggered no immediate alarm. A stalled car, an accident, these are common occurrences. This is the danger of normalcy bias, the human brain's tendency to interpret situations in the most familiar and least threatening way. The junior guard in the passenger seat reacted accordingly. He reported later that his first thought was of the delay and the paperwork it would cause. He reached for the radio handset to report the obstruction as per his training. He was operating within the confines of established procedure. He was reacting to what he saw as a logistical problem. The driver, however, saw something different. His mental process moved to the second stage of the loop: orient. He was not just seeing a car, he was processing the data within the context of his experience. The car was positioned too perfectly. There were no other vehicles. There were no people standing outside, no hazard lights, no smoke. The scene was sterile. It was wrong. This orientation phase, the synthesis of raw data with experience and training, took less than 5 seconds. While his partner saw an inconvenience, the driver recognized the geometric signature of a deliberate roadblock. He saw the potential for a kill zone. Now came the third and most critical stage: decide. 18 seconds began here. The driver was presented with 2 distinct courses of action. The first was the prescribed one. Standard operating procedure dictated he bring the 7-ton vehicle to a controlled stop no less than 50 yards from the obstruction. He would then instruct the communications guard to issue a code red alert, place the vehicle in reverse and attempt to withdraw. This was the safe, logical and corporately mandated response. It was also, he instinctively knew, a death sentence. Stopping would make them a stationary target. Reversing a heavy, unwieldy truck would be slow, giving the unseen enemy ample time to close the rear of the box and initiate their assault. Stopping meant surrendering the initiative. Stopping meant dying according to someone else's plan. The second course of action was unthinkable by any conventional metric. It involved accelerating. It involved treating the 14,000-pound vehicle not as a vessel to be protected, but as a weapon to be wielded. It meant aiming the armored prow of his truck directly at the obstacle and driving through it. This path carried immense risks. The collision could disable his own vehicle. It could cause a loss of control, sending them careening into the woods. It was a violent, unpredictable, and unauthorized course of action. It violated every rule in the book. The driver's decision was made in the silent space between one heartbeat and the next. He weighed the certainty of death by compliance against the possibility of survival through aggression. His 20 years of experience in places where rules were meaningless and survival was the only metric collapsed into a single intuitive command: static defense is death. At 6:47 and 21 seconds, his foot left the brake pedal and pressed down hard on the accelerator. This was the final stage of the loop. Act. The sudden surge of the diesel engine, the lurch of acceleration, was the first sign to the other crew members that this was not a normal situation. The passenger guard looked over, his question dying on his lips as he saw the expression on the driver's face. It was not an expression of panic or fear, but of absolute, chilling focus. The truck, which had been decelerating for the curve, now gathered momentum. 40 miles per hour. 45. The attackers, positioned in the woods, saw the change immediately. The target was not stopping. It was accelerating. Their plan was disintegrating before the first shot had even been fired. The commander of the ambush team likely gave the order to initiate prematurely. They could no longer wait for the target to enter the perfect center of the kill zone. They had to engage it while it was still moving. A much more difficult proposition. At 6:47 and 24 seconds, the first shot rang out. It was a single, precisely aimed round from the flanking team on the driver's side. The crack of the rifle was followed instantly by a percussive bang as the 5.56mm bullet struck the armoured windshield directly in the driver's line of sight. The round did not penetrate. Instead, it transferred its kinetic energy into the composite glass, creating a milky, spider-webbed crater about the size of a fist. The purpose of this first shot was psychological. It was meant to be the shocking, violent announcement that the situation had changed, to stun the crew and reinforce the command to stop. For the driver, it did the opposite. It was confirmation. His decision had been the correct one. 3 seconds later, the orderly silence of the morning was shattered completely. Both fire teams opened up with sustained automatic fire. The sound inside the armoured cab was not the sharp crack of rifles, but a deafening metallic roar, like being inside a steel drum during a hailstorm. Dozens of rounds per second hammered against the vehicle's body and windows. Each impact was a violent, concussive blow that shuddered through the frame. The windshield, already damaged, began to craze further, the web of fractures spreading with each new hit until the forward view was almost entirely obscured by a mosaic of shattered, opaque laminate. The driver was now effectively driving blind, aiming his 7-ton missile by memory and instinct toward a target he could no longer clearly see. Simultaneously, the attacker's rearguard element, a heavy-duty pickup truck, appeared in the armored vehicle's side mirrors, accelerating to close the trap. But they were too late. The driver's decision to accelerate instead of stopping had disrupted the timing of the entire ambush envelope. The rear block was supposed to seal in a stationary target. Now it was in a high-speed pursuit it was not prepared for. At 6:47 and 33 seconds, 21 seconds after the driver made his decision, the armored truck hit the blocking sedan. The physics of the collision were brutal and unforgiving. A 14,000-pound vehicle traveling at just over 50 miles per hour carries a tremendous amount of kinetic energy. The sedan, weighing less than 3,000 pounds, might as well have been made of cardboard. The reinforced steel bumper of the armored truck struck the car broadside just behind the engine block. The sedan's chassis folded, glass vaporized, and the entire vehicle was violently thrown from the roadway, tumbling into the ditch on the right side. For the occupants of the armored truck, the impact was a jarring, single event, a massive thud that felt more like hitting a deep pothole at speed than colliding with another vehicle. The driver did not slow down. His foot remained planted on the accelerator. This was the critical psychological override. The instinct in any collision is to brake. But braking now would mean stopping in the heart of the kill zone, entangled in the wreckage. His training, not the corporate manual but the muscle memory forged in hostile territories, screamed one thing: maintain momentum. The only way out of the kill zone is through it. The truck was now past the primary obstruction and clear of the main firing positions of the flank teams. The attackers, who had been focused on the cab, now shifted their fire toward the tyres and rear of the vehicle as it sped away. Several rounds struck the run-flat tyres, which performed exactly as designed, absorbing the projectiles and maintaining their structural integrity. The rear guard in the pickup truck attempted to give chase, but their path was now partially obstructed by the wreckage of their own blockade vehicle. This small, ironic delay gave the armoured truck a precious few seconds of separation. The pursuit was short-lived. The attacker's mission profile was based on a rapid, surgical strike against a disabled target. It was not equipped for a protracted vehicle chase. Firing from a moving vehicle at a moving target is exceptionally difficult, and they were now outside their carefully prepared ambush site. After a few hundred yards and a final, ineffective burst of gunfire, the pickup truck slowed and turned off, abandoning the failed operation. From the first shot to the last, the entire engagement had lasted less than 90 seconds. In that time, the attackers had fired an estimated 250 rounds from at least 4 separate rifles. The armoured vehicle sustained over 180 impacts to its body and glass. The number of rounds that penetrated the armoured shell into the crew compartment was 0. The driver continued for another 2 miles before he judged it safe to slow down and pull over. Only then did the adrenaline begin to subside, replaced by the trembling aftermath of a lethal encounter. The mission was a failure, but their lives were intact. The aftermath tells a story in statistics and damage reports. The cargo, the $5 million in bearer bonds, was completely secure, the hardened briefcase untouched in the rear compartment. The personnel, while not physically penetrated by bullets, were not unharmed. The driver and the front passenger both suffered minor cuts and abrasions from spalling, the shower of interior metal fragments caused by the sheer force of the bullet impacts on the armour. All 3 crew members experienced temporary hearing loss from the concussive roar of the impacts inside the steel box, and the passenger guard sustained a mild concussion when the vehicle struck the sedan. But they were alive. The vehicle, on the other hand, was functionally destroyed. It was a total loss, valued at over $200,000. Every single panel of armoured glass was shattered and opaque. The bodywork on the front, sides and rear was pockmarked with hundreds of bullet impacts, resembling a dimpled metallic skin. The front bumper and grille were mangled from the collision. The radiator was punctured in multiple places and all of its coolant had drained out. The electrical system was failing due to severed conduits in the engine bay. 2 of the tyres, though they had not failed catastrophically, were shredded beyond repair. The vehicle had performed its final, ultimate function. It had been a shield, and it had held just long enough. It was now little more than a multi-ton piece of evidence. For the antagonists, the outcome was a catastrophic failure. Their return on a significant investment in intelligence, planning, and personnel was 0. Not only did they fail to secure the asset, but the failed attack left behind a wealth of forensic evidence. The wrecked sedan, shell casings, and eyewitness accounts from other drivers who appeared on the scene minutes later allowed law enforcement to connect the operation back to the cartel's known activities. Several arrests were made in the following months, including the inside source at the financial institution. The professional crew that executed the ambush was believed to have suffered at least one serious injury, if not a fatality, inside the blocking vehicle that was so violently struck. They had planned for every contingency except one, a target that refused to be a target. So what are the lessons we can distill from this event? The analysis must balance the interplay of technology, procedure, and the human factor. It is easy to point to the B6 level armor and the run-flat tires and declare this a victory for technology. And in a limited sense, it is. The armor worked. It absorbed hundreds of rounds and prevented the immediate incapacitation of the crew. It provided the critical window of time in which a decision could be made. But technology alone would have resulted in failure. A driver who followed procedure would have been sitting inside a perfectly intact armored coffin, waiting for the attackers to bring out their cutting tools and finish the job. The core failure was institutional. The security company's standard operating procedures were sound for 99% of contingencies, for accidents and common criminal threats. But they were dangerously inadequate when faced with a professional military-style adversary. The procedures were predictable. And in the world of high-stakes security, predictability is a fatal vulnerability. The attackers did not just guess what the driver would do, they knew because they had likely studied the same operational doctrines. They built their entire plan around forcing a compliant, by-the-book response. Their failure was a failure of imagination. It was an intellectual arrogance that led them to believe their plan was more powerful than a man's will to live. This brings us to the ultimate lesson of the engagement. It is a lesson that is often forgotten in an industry increasingly reliant on gadgets and remote surveillance. Technology buys you time, training gives you options. But it is willpower that determines the outcome. The driver's decision was not born from a manual, it was an act of profound professional defiance. He broke the rules to uphold the mission, which was not just to protect the asset, but to survive. He instinctively understood that in an ambush, the vehicle is no longer just a shield, it must become a weapon. This mental transition from a defensive to an offensive posture is the single most difficult and most important leap a security professional can make. We can distill 4 key takeaways from this incident. First, intelligent security is the foundation of all physical security. The most advanced armor in the world is worthless if the enemy knows your destination and your timetable. The breach did not happen on the highway. It happened weeks earlier in an office building on a compromised computer. Second, static defense is death. In any asymmetrical engagement, ceding the initiative to the attacker by becoming a stationary target is a recipe for disaster. Mobility is life. Third, equipment buys time, but training determines outcomes. The driver's 2 decades of experience were more valuable than 2 inches of armored glass. His past had prepared him for a future that his company's procedures had not anticipated. Finally, methodology must evolve to match the threat. When facing adversaries who operate with military precision, security protocols must incorporate tactical flexibility and empower on-the-ground commanders to make unconventional decisions. In the final analysis, the story of this failed ambush is the story of a single choice. It was a choice to transform a shield into a sword, a choice to embrace violence as a tool of survival, a choice to drive through the problem rather than stop before it. The driver did not outshoot his opponents. He did not outmaneuver them in any classical sense. He outthought them. He defeated their plan by refusing to participate in it. He broke their OODA loop by acting in a way they had not oriented on and could not decide how to counter in time. We call the psychological crossing point where training becomes action, where years of drilled responses and intellectual knowledge are instantly synthesized into a single, decisive physical act. The mental bridge. It is the most critical and least understood element of performance under pressure. The driver did not have time to consciously review his options or consult a manual. He crossed that mental bridge in an instant. His experience gave him the blueprint, his intuition gave him the spark, and his will gave him the strength to turn the key. He saw the coffin they had built for him and decided to use it as a battering ram instead. The fight goes to those who understand that the only way out of the kill zone is through it. End of debrief.